Imagine if our highways were managed like the inefficient state-owned enterprises of China, the former Soviet Union, and 1970s Britain. You don't have to imagine very much. They are. U.S. highways operate almost entirely outside the market system, which created the internet and the smartphone. They're not subject to pricing. People think they're free when they're not. There's no competition. And all decisions about when, where, and how are based mostly on politics, not economic value or the value of our time. Drivers, according to transportation authorities, are not referred to as customers. We're referred to as users. And we are treated as such, used. It's time our 20th century American highway model is fixed. It's badly broken and needs to be replaced.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Think about what American motorists put up with when we drive on our freeways and our major highways. Chronic congestion, hours wasted in traffic, poor maintenance, crumbling bridges, Congress launching boondoggle bridges to nowhere. These problems all stem from an obsolete funding and management model. So says my guest, Bob Poole, who's the founder of Reason Foundation and is their director of transportation policy. Bob went to MIT, engineer, advised the Reagan, both Bush, the Clinton administrations on infrastructure issues, and he was also an advisor to the Trump transition team on all things infrastructure. Bob, let's talk about why our highways aren't serving our interest and what we can do about it.
Okay. Our highways are a classic state-owned enterprise. They are run by a government agency that has nothing to do with the market. Their budgets come annually from politicians and legislatures. We do pay gasoline taxes, which are supposed to be the highway fund. It's supposed to be a user fee, but they're actually paid to the state governments and to the federal government. They go into the treasury of those. They get appropriated annually by legislators. There's basically, there's a little bit of financing because states sometimes issue transportation bonds, sometimes backed by fuel tax revenues, sometimes backed by general tax revenues. But for the mostly, it's on a cash basis. And the people who use highways are not even talked about as customers. In the transportation business, they're called users and treated as users. And in fact, in some states like California, they're treated as nuisances. That the policy focus is we got to get them out of their cars and off the highways.
So they're not customers.
They're not customers in any way, shape, or form.
I think you're right. They're users and they are being used.
They're being used, exactly. This is a terrible model. Milton Friedman was the one who first put me onto this.
Yeah.
He wrote an essay that's little known in the 1950s, before the interstate highways, saying that our highways are a socialist enterprise.
Well, let's do a little history. We started out in the 19th century when we had horse and carriage and buggies and that sort of thing. And we had a lot of highways that were owned by entrepreneurs, and you paid user fees like you did with the canals.
They were called turnpikes. They were private. They were started by entrepreneurs and people representing towns that wanted to have better connections to other towns that were 30, 40, 50, 80 miles away.
So the automobile starts getting very popular, particularly thanks to Henry Ford. More cars on the road. We need more highways. We can't do this.
Well, first thing we needed was paved highways.
Okay, paved.
And the city streets were paved by then, but because there were lots of wagons, there were trolleys with tracks down the street and so forth. But almost all highways were dirt roads or gravel roads. They were not paved in those days. So the movement came partly from the farmers to have paved roads outside the cities, rural roads. And the old turnpike model, the turnpikes were basically all gone by that time. Most of them had eventually folded as
because of trains,
competition from railroads.
Railroads,
basically. So we didn't have the examples anymore, and people sort of forgot about it. And so Oregon came up with the first gasoline tax. All cars got about the same miles per gallon, the early cars, and it seemed like an obvious user fee. Tolls would have been better, but it was cumbersome to collect tolls. You pay, you buy gas anyway. And within 10 years, all states had gasoline taxes dedicated to originally dedicated entirely to highways, in usually called a highway trust fund. Federal government in the 30s, in the
Now,
Depression.
the gas taxes were collected at the state level.
At the state level.
And did we have federal taxes, gas taxes then?
We didn't then.
Okay,
Highways were entirely a state responsibility.
Okay.
In the 30s, in the Depression, federal government, Congress looked at all the revenue coming into states through their gasoline taxes. Gee, we should get into this
need
game.
some of that.
So they put in a 1 cent a gallon federal gasoline
Yeah.
tax that the states had to collect and send to Washington. It was not for highways. It was just a general revenue source to help bail out the federal government and support the New Deal programs. And they gradually raised it to 2 cents. I think by the time the Interstate Highway Program came along in '56, and they proposed a new federal gasoline tax, it was either 4 or 5 cents a gallon. That was first dedicated highway use tax by the federal government, and that was solely for the purpose of building the interstates. It wasn't to fund state highways. It was to build the interstate highway system, and the presumption was, well, once that's built, it'll go away. But what happens?
A tax that goes away.
A tax that goes away, you're never going to see it. So it took longer and more cost to build the interstate.
How much are we raising from the gas tax now at the federal level?
It's about 40-some billion a year.
40-some billion.
But it's not growing in real terms because of improved fuel economy, electric cars.
Well,
and
that's
so
one
forth.
of the ironies of this system. Ironies may be the wrong word, but as we make cars more fuel efficient,
right? Oh, yeah.
And they use less gas.
Yeah.
You're collecting less revenue
Exactly.
to pay for the roads.
So what
Talk about
a lot
unintended consequences.
It's an unintended consequence of a set of other policies. Originally started because of energy independence. We didn't want to be importing so much from the Middle East, but it's now an environmental type of thing. And I don't think, that's going to continue going on regardless of the change. It may get slowed down a little bit, but I don't think there's any.
But the $40 billion
now.
doesn't go to highways and.
Oh no! See what happened
so
over the years.
That's changed.
That changed. The Congress kept increasing it. It's now 18-point-something cents a gallon. Hasn't been increased since 1993 though, because it's become so unpopular. Congress invented. There's 108 federal programs that are funded by federal transportation program, transit, sidewalks, bike paths, recreational trails, all funded out of that federal highway. 108 separate programs.
It's almost a quarter of the budget, isn't it, or even more that goes into these separate.
It's about 25% of the budget that goes to non-highway purposes. So that's one reason I think that it's so unpopular.
Well, and the gas tax is a regressive tax, isn't it?
Well, it is to some extent.
And it hits the poorest people hardest because they pay disproportionately more for gas.
True. On the other hand, rich people tend to drive bigger, more expensive gas guzzlers to some extent.
Are you talking about my F-150 pickup truck?
Right. So equity is gas taxes are not as inequitable in that sense as state sales taxes for transportation, which we see a lot of in urban areas. Those are really regressive, but there's probably not any good other way to pay for a lot of local transit and stuff. So anyway, the federal thing is broken. That's now collecting not enough. Congress ramped up the spending so much starting about 15 years ago that when the gas tax started leveling off, they said, wait a minute, how are we going to continue the gravy train? So they started, every time they reauthorized the federal highway program, they had to get bailout money. It's $10 billion a year of general fund money that now goes into the highway trust fund in addition to what comes in from gas taxes now, year after year after year. So they're taking in 40 and spending 50, round numbers, to support all this other stuff that they're doing. And every single one of those 108 programs has a constituency behind it. So if you try to say, oh, no, we want to go back to having it be only for highways, forget it. The politics of that just don't work.
So you've written a book about it. It's going to come out in a couple of weeks called Rethinking American Highways, a 21st Century Vision for Better Infrastructure. So you have solutions.
I have solutions. The vision is that we've got to shift from this state-owned enterprise funded by taxes to basically a kind of a modern-day toll road model where the highways are basically vital utilities like electricity, water supply, telecommunications, the natural gas service that comes to your house, cell phones, cable. All of these things are provided by companies You pay the company based on how much of the service you use. You get a transparent bill. The money goes entirely to the company unless the government puts some little utility tax on it, but that's a different question. But that model, highways are the only vital utility that we have that is not done as in a corporate structure with user payments directly to the provider. Instead, the money goes to the government and is allocated politically, which is why you get all sorts of perverse outcomes, like Bridges to Nowhere, a project in every legislator's district this year, but maintenance takes the leftovers. And so you have massive deferred maintenance building up because it's not politically sexy for the legislators to fund that. So
who owns the land that the interstate highways are on?
The states. The states own the interstate
So it's not
highways.
The federal government doesn't own that.
No,
So those
the federal
are owned by the
government paid
states.
90% of the cost originally, but they owned, and it's the state's responsibility to properly maintain, widen when it's needed, and rebuild when they wear out. And they were built with, at best, a 50-year design life, and most of them are older than 50 years now, and in the next decade, almost all of them will be older than 50 years, need to be rebuilt. Many of them need to be widened. I did a big study at Reason Foundation 4 years ago, estimated the cost in the ballpark of $1 trillion to rebuild and widen where necessary. We looked at where it would be necessary.
So this has been tried in Europe, and it's also...
Oh, yes, yeah.
So this is... and you go in their interstates or whatever they call them there.
Motorways.
Motorways.
They're
tolled. Fabulous.
Most of the motorways are tolled. Germany does not have tolled motorways, but France, Italy, Spain, Portugal all have tolled motorways, to some extent in Austria, and all over Latin America. This is what they're doing now.
Who owns them?
Well, it depends on the country. Some in France.
Just generically,
Nominally, the national government in France owns them, but they're long-term franchises, like our electric utility franchise are typically between 50 and 99 years.
Okay.
So the companies own the facilities for the duration of the franchise.
And these
when it expires, the government can renegotiate a new term, can put it out to bid for somebody to come in and buy the assets and then run them for another franchise term, or the government, in rare cases, can take it over and run the utility itself. So that's the model that we have in France, Italy.
So this is private ownership, but like the utilities, it's regulated.
It's regulated, yes.
And it's regulated by the state or the Fed?
By the states. In France, I think it's national government, but in Australia, it's the state governments. In Canada, it's the province governments.
And the owner of these highways have an incentive to keep them highly maintained and user-friendly,
Absolutely.
to use that user word.
First of all, if they're going to issue revenue bonds based on the toll revenues,
you want people coming back to use your product.
Insist that they have proper maintenance because otherwise people won't use the roads.
We've tried this in Indiana, didn't we? Didn't Mitch Daniels sell?
Mitch Daniels, the governor,
Indiana Tollway,
leased for 75 years the Indiana Toll Road. Now it turns out the initial team that bought it very aggressively financed it, and they had balloon payments coming due. They paid $3.8 billion for a 75-year franchise.
So they overpaid.
Balloon payments coming
due. They financed it improperly.
They financed, and after the Great Recession, cut their truck traffic revenue in half. They could not make a balloon payment, and they filed Chapter 11. So there was no taxpayer bailout. Wisely, the Indiana state government said to the lenders, all right, let's together figure out how you could get protected out of this. They agreed to put it out to bid for a new franchise.
So this is like a company going, my old private equity world, you just had somebody new come in, they pay less for it than those economics
Well,
work.
it turned out in this particular case, a consortium of pension funds led by Australia's IFM investors, which invests in infrastructure on behalf of pension funds in Australia, paid $5.6 or $5.7 billion, more than the original concession, for the remaining something like 72 years of the concession. They decided that they didn't need the double-digit return that the for-profit companies were getting. They would be satisfied earning a safe 8% return. So they put very heavy equity.
I'd be getting a safe 8% return.
Heavy equity. They put in more than 50% equity.
So
into the deal,
you're
and
saying,
only had to finance
you're saying
half.
this is ideal for pension funds
It's
to invest
ideal
in.
for pension funds.
Yeah,
Yes.
so public pension funds could be investing in this.
And we are having not only pension, there's global infrastructure investment funds that are many of them headquartered in New York, that are investing in infrastructure all over the world. They can't find good projects to invest in the United States. Same thing, the pension funds, the big pension funds like CalPERS and the New York State Retirement System, some of them have now invested in the new franchise
so
for
this
the
solves
Indiana
one
toll
of their
road.
problems, which
It
is
helps
how do you,
solve their
how do you
problem
find
of
an
diversifying
investable
the
asset
portfolio
that
and getting sound,
protects your
long-term-
pensioners?
Yeah.
So the let's imagine this is in place. We're driving from Washington D.C. We're in that area right now. I want to go to Columbus, Ohio, and I want to get out on 270 and head that direction. How do I pay for that? If
You
I'm a
pay
user?
with an EasyPass transponder. We don't even need new technology to do this. EasyPass is an interoperable system. All of the Northeast and Midwest states that have toll roads already are EasyPass. So you get one bill using a single transponder anywhere. We'll have a nation. If we do this model to rebuild the interstates, we'll have a single transponder operable nationwide. The trucking industry already has a go-anywhere transponder that works in every state that has toll facilities.
So if I'm paying for this, what can you project what costs would be to a typical?
We estimated in our study where we looked at a 40-year model. We started out with 2010 values, 3.5 cents a mile for passenger cars on interstates, on rebuilt interstates, but inflation adjusted by the Consumer Price Index every year.
Okay.
So it would be 3.5 cents a mile in real terms, starting with the 2010 value.
Do you do it by weight class, like a
Well,
pickup
for cars,
truck?
there's not much difference.
Okay.
We
But
didn't
then
think it was worth-
18-wheelers would be paying.
18-wheelers would pay 3 or 4 times that.
Now, how if then would the gas tax go away?
Gas tax would go away. You'd pay one and not the other.
So would the gas tax offset be similar, comparable to, less than, more than?
Gas tax is less than this per mile. It works out. Gas tax, federal plus state, works out to between 2 and 2.5 cents a mile.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons we're not rebuilding interstates. There's not enough money coming in to build the premium infrastructure that's the most important. It's okay to build the 2-lane state highways.
Now, I'm sitting with a man who pioneered public-private toll concessions. You developed the high occupancy toll lanes, HOV.
Yep.
You developed
HOT.
truck toll lanes. You did virtual exclusive busways and managed arterials. So I'm beginning to think we could probably figure this out with you.
I mean, these ideas, all the ones you've mentioned, have been tried and are working. But this utility model is now, it took a whole book for me to really fully explain this and give the historical background. It comes out in June.
In June. Who's the publisher?
Chicago Press.
UC, okay.
And it's $30. We negotiated
on Amazon.
to get an affordable price.
Yeah.
They wanted to start out at $45.
Well, it looks like a $45 book. There's a lot in it.
I'm doing a national book tour starting in July.
Yeah.
To try to get the word to state transportation agencies, to university transportation centers. I'm speaking at the Kennedy School at Harvard, at UC Berkeley, at UCLA, USC, a number of others.
Yeah. So we talked in an earlier show about air traffic control and the political barriers to change. It seems like there are massive political barriers to go from where we are to a utility system.
But I think the key to this, the key to start, the two key things.
Yeah.
One is the need to start shifting from per gallon to per mile as the way to fund highways. The second is the crying need to restart rebuilding the interstate highway system. The only way to do that is with per mile tolls. And some of the state, Indiana is already underway. They have done big feasibility studies of their own in the last year and a half. They're in the phase 2 of those studies. They want federal permission to be able to toll finance the reconstruction of all of their interstates. So it's starting to happen at the state level.
Now,
Wisconsin legislature is in favor of doing this.
President Trump's talked about $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Did you have a hand in shaping that?
I had a hand in that. I was an advisor to D.J. Gribbin, the White House infrastructure maven. And it called for giving the states the option of tolling, removing the federal barrier that exists on tolling currently non-tolled interstates, but it would be for the purpose of financing the reconstruction and modernization.
So we need Congress to act on that.
Congress would have to act on that. Yes, you cannot do that without Congress. Although there is a 3-state pilot program that I'm sure Indiana has applied to that would give them permission to do one Interstate with toll financing as a test. And that's at least a starting point. If we can get one or two states doing this out, demonstrating that it works, that there's investor interest in doing it, I think that'll start the ball rolling.
So we've talked about the interstate system, and we've got to wind up here in just a second, but what about the two-lane highways and
the
rural
two-lane
Indiana,
highways,
things
yeah,
like
what
that?
we're going to need
What
to
we
do with that is to, state by state, have the states come up with a mileage-based user fee, a per-mile charging system to phase in and phase out their state gas taxes. We can't wait for Washington to do this. The states own the highways. They are under the gun to
Using
come up
the
with
Easy Pass system to determine
with something like
usage,
that. Yes, yes. Or something as simple as annual odometer readings, or a little gadget that plugs into the diagnostic port under your dashboard that doesn't track exactly where you go, but tracks how many miles you drive during the month, and then can have a communications link to upload. All right, this is the number of miles that Bill Walton drove this month, and this is how many were in Virginia, and how many were in this state and that state, based on cell tower locations. That's all you need.
And the politics of this are such that would the average driver feel like this is going to be more expensive and you need to be sold on the fact you're going to end up with a better highway?
This is a terrible idea because the average driver thinks it's going to be Big Brother in his car.
Yeah, well,
but there's pilot programs, Bill, in about 8 states now.
Yeah.
That are trying out various methods and using private sector intermediaries to be the ones that administer the program, so you're not paying it to the government, and giving them simple ways to do it and a choice. And people like to have a choice, and the people who actually participate in these pilots get it after a while, and they actually find it user friendly, and they think as long as it's basically replacing the gas tax, not being an add-on, they think that'll be okay, and they can see the case why fuel tax is running out of steam.
Great. Bob, thank you. I highly recommend picking up a copy of Rethinking America's Highways, a 21st Century Vision for a Better Infrastructure.
It will be on Amazon, and there will be a Kindle edition also.
And they can find you at reason.org?
Reason.org.
Okay. Bob, thank you. Until the next time. Now, here is an idea worth exploring. Think of our highways as utility businesses, similar to the investor-owned companies that provide most of our electricity, water, natural gas, phones, etc. While government regulated, utilities operate as businesses, charging customers directly for what they use and financing major investments in their networks. This utility model would put highway customers first, tackle traffic congestion, rebuild, expand aging facilities, keep the system well maintained, taking advantage of new technology like automated vehicles. It's time to look into private sector solutions to America's crumbling infrastructure problem.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe at thebillwaltonshow.com or on iTunes.